Your talent stole your childhood. Your fame locked you inside your own house. Your love for children became the worst accusation anyone has ever made against a human being. Your money became $500 million of debt. Your doctor became your killer. Every single thing that should have saved you was the exact thing that destroyed you. This was not bad luck. This was not tragedy. This was not a series of unfortunate events. Welcome. You are Micheal Jackson, and your life was a nightmare. You were born in Gary, Indiana, August 29, 1958, a steel town built on smoke and debt, where the mill whistle told people when to wake up and when to go home. Your family was 9 children and 2 parents sharing a 2-bedroom house. Not a metaphor. 11 people, 2 bedrooms. Your father, Joe Jackson, worked the mill by day and played guitar in a local R&B band by night. He had talent. He also had 9 mouths to feed and exactly 0 patience for wasted potential. You were 4 years old when you started mimicking your brother Jermaine's dance moves across the living room floor. You were 5 when your school teachers stopped mid-lesson just to listen to you sing. Joe Jackson heard you, and in that moment, without a single word being spoken about it, the trap closed. He organized his sons into a group. He scheduled rehearsals. He arrived at those rehearsals with a belt, sometimes a stick. The rules were simple. You performed or you got hit. Your father also had opinions about your face. He told you repeatedly that your nose was ugly, too wide, wrong. He said this to his own child. He kept saying it. For years, he never stopped. In 1993, you sat across from Oprah Winfrey, 90 million people watching, and told her you used to vomit just from seeing your father walk into a room. Not from what he did in that moment, from the sight of him. That is not a difficult childhood. That is a body that has learned to treat a parent as a physical threat. While other kids in Gary played outside, rode bikes, failed tests, and wasted time the way children are supposed to, you rehearsed. Every single day. The childhood was not shortened, it was canceled. You had no friends. You were never free long enough, or still long enough, or just a child long enough to make one. So you found your own, an actual rat, a pet. You kept it and loved it the way you would love most things in your life, completely and without asking for anything back. In 1972, a horror film called Ben was released. A lonely, terminally ill boy whose only real companion was a rat named Ben, leader of a colony. Someone decided 14-year-old Micheal Jackson should record the theme song. The lyrics were almost childlike. Friendship, loyalty, not being alone. You sang them with your whole chest. The song won the Golden Globe for Best Original Song. It was nominated for the Academy Award. It became your first solo #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. A 14-year-old boy singing about unconditional friendship with a rat. Completely sincere. And the entire world sat down and listened. Because it was the most honest thing you had ever been allowed to say out loud. Your only friend was a rat, and it made you a star. In 1964, Joe Jackson formalized the group. Jackie, Tito, Jermaine, Marlon, and Micheal. You were 6 years old. The venues were nightclubs and bars across Gary and neighboring cities. The hours were late. The rooms were full of adults. No one asked if this was appropriate for children. Nobody was asking those questions yet. Rehearsals at the family house. Long. Mistakes not handled gently. Your father watched from a chair, and the chair meant something. In 1968, Diana Ross and Bobby Taylor brought the group to Berry Gordy at Motown Records, the most important black music label in the United States. The last door of your ordinary life swinging shut. In 1969, the Jackson 5 signed with Motown. 4 consecutive singles, 4 #1s. I Want You Back, A, B, C, The Love You Save, I'll Be There. That had never happened before with any group in the history of the Billboard Hot 100. And you were 11 years old. The other kids your age were learning long division. You were on a tour bus learning what it cost to be the voice the world wouldn't stop listening to. You were not allowed to be tired, not allowed to have an off night, not allowed to be 11. You did not choose this. You were chosen by it before you understood what was being chosen. That distinction was never acknowledged by anyone. In 1975, the group left Motown for Epic Records, becoming the Jacksons. You were 17. Professionally famous for 6 years. The calculation of what this life was still going to cost you was nowhere near finished. In 1979, you made Off the Wall with Quincy Jones, 21 years old. 15 years of professional performance behind you, 4 simultaneous top 10 singles. The first time any black solo artist had achieved that. 20 million copies sold worldwide. At the Grammys, it received 1 nomination. 1. Album of the Year was not a conversation. You sat in the audience and absorbed what that meant. You said the snub made you angry, that you were going to make something they could not ignore. If you've ever wondered how the most famous person alive ends up completely alone, stay with us. Because that part is coming, and it's worse than you think. Thriller was released in November 1982. You were 24 years old, 7 singles. All 7 entered the top 10. That had never happened with any album. It has not happened since. Billie Jean, Beat It, Wanna Be Startin' Something, Human Nature, PYT, The Girl Is Mine, Thriller. At the Grammys in 1984, you won 8 in a single night, a record that stood for more than 20 years. 37 consecutive weeks at #1 on the Billboard 200. More than 70 million copies sold. The best-selling album in the history of recorded music. The number is still climbing. You were 24 years old. The music video for Thriller was 14 minutes long. $500,000. John Landis directed. It did not play as a music video. It premiered as a film. MTV broadcast it for months. The world watched it until they had every frame memorized. The moonwalk happened in March 1983 on the Motown 25 television special. You performed Billie Jean, grabbed your hat, and slid backward across the stage in a way that made people physically lurch forward in their seats. It looked like you were walking forward. You were moving backward. Your feet said progress. Your body said otherwise. The signature move of your entire career is an illusion. You appear to advance. You are going the other way. That is not a coincidence. That is your life summarized in 8 counts. On January 27, 1984, you were filming a Pepsi commercial at the Shrine Auditorium in Los Angeles. The pyrotechnics fired too early. Your hair caught fire on camera. 2nd and 3rd degree burns across your scalp. You were hospitalized. Pepsi settled for $1.5 million. You donated the money to a burn center. The doctors gave you opioid painkillers for the pain. For the first time, you were 25 years old. You were the most famous person alive. And somewhere in that hospital room, a dependency began that would not end for 25 years. That same year, at the Grammy Awards, you attended with Brooke Shields, the most famous young actress in the world. The press called her your girlfriend. She wasn't, exactly, but she was one of the only people on earth who could sit next to you at an event without the entire room tilting. She would speak at your memorial 25 years later. In 1985, you co-wrote We Are the World with Lionel Richie. 45 artists, recorded overnight. $63 million raised for the African famine. The best-selling American single in history at the time. The man who could not walk down a street was simultaneously feeding a continent. The album after Thriller was called Bad. 1987. 29 years old. 5 consecutive #1s. I Just Can't Stop Loving You. Bad. The Way You Make Me Feel. Man in the Mirror. Dirty Diana. 5 in sequence. Never done before with a single album. The Bad World Tour. 42 countries. 4.4 million people. The highest grossing concert tour in history at that point. A massive, record-breaking success. The critics said it wasn't Thriller. They were right. It was the 2nd best-selling album of the decade. The response was, close, but no. When you are measured only against yourself, every version of winning contains a version of falling short. You built that trap with Thriller. There was no way out. Dangerous came out in 1991. 32 million copies. Black or White. Remember the Time. Heal the World. And by now, the physical changes that had started after the Pepsi accident were impossible to ignore. The nose, the skin. The world was already talking. You had not yet explained. You bought a 2,700-acre property in Los Olivos, California in 1988 and renamed it Neverland Ranch. Around $17 million. Neverland. Named for the island where children never grow up. You were not subtle about what you were building or why. A full amusement park, a Ferris wheel, a roller coaster, a movie theater for 50 people, a working train station with real locomotives circling the property, a zoo, giraffes, elephants, an orangutan, an alligator, a chimpanzee named Bubbles, dressed in matching outfits, brought to press events, once introduced to the mayor of Osaka. This was reconstruction. The childhood in Gary had been taken at 4 years old. You were building it back, from scratch, with enough money to make the math work. You also invited children to come. Sick children, kids from disadvantaged families. You opened the gates. At first, extraordinary philanthropy. Later, central evidence in 2 criminal investigations. You could see nothing wrong with inviting children to sleep in your bedroom. You said this on camera to a journalist in 2003. You said it was the most loving thing in the world. That sentence is either the statement of a person who never grew up and cannot see adult behavior through an adult frame, or it is something else. 30 years later, the world has not agreed on which. You lived at Neverland mostly alone. The rides ran when you wanted them. The movie theater played films to an audience of 1. Elizabeth Taylor, your closest adult friend, once said publicly that you were the loneliest person she had ever known. She was not wrong. Let's talk about your face. You were a beautiful child. Wide eyes, expressive features, the kind of face cameras loved immediately. You also had a broad nose. Your father told you it was ugly, to your face. When you were small, he never stopped. You could not unhear it. The rhinoplasties started in 1979 after a broken nose in rehearsal, medically indicated. The nose that emerged from surgery was already narrower than the one that went in. More surgeries followed. You had vitiligo, an autoimmune disorder that progressively destroys pigment cells, leaving white patches across the skin. Painful, unpredictable. The diagnosis was confirmed by autopsy in 2009. To manage the patches, you used heavy makeup and prescription depigmenting creams to match the affected skin. Across years, the result was a dramatically different appearance. The tabloid story: you were erasing your blackness. Self-hatred made visible. The real story: a man with a real disease managing it with available tools, while undergoing surgeries driven by a damage his father had started in elementary school, while the world constructed its own narrative from the outside. The autopsy confirmed the vitiligo. It also confirmed that after decades of rhinoplasties, almost no original nose structure remained. The anatomy had been replaced with prosthetics. Your father called your nose ugly. The world mocked what you did about it. Neither one ever stopped. We're not close to the worst part yet. Stay with this. In the summer of 1993, a 13-year-old boy named Jordan Chandler and his father accused you of sexual abuse. The accusation landed inside the biggest career on Earth at full velocity. The LAPD opened a criminal investigation. Your home was searched. Investigators photographed your body. Jordan had described specific physical characteristics, and the photographs were compared against that description. There were correspondences. You denied everything. You released a recorded statement, agitated, specific, made under enormous distress. The criminal case collapsed when Jordan declined to testify. The civil suit settled for $23 million. No admission of guilt. The damage was not the kind that winning fixes. You had not been convicted of anything. You were not innocent in the eyes of most people who had formed an opinion. Both true, simultaneously. That is a specific kind of prison. The History album in 1995. You Are Not Alone. The first single in Billboard history to debut directly at number 1. 20 million copies. The industry called it an underperformance. You married Lisa Marie Presley in 1994, the daughter of Elvis, in secret. She said, until her death in 2023, that she had loved you genuinely. The marriage lasted 20 months. In 1996, you married Debbie Rowe, your dermatologist's nurse. She volunteered to carry your children. Your son Prince was born in 1997, your daughter Paris in 1998. Debbie surrendered custody after the divorce. In 2001, Invincible, your last studio album, $30 million to produce. Sony provided almost no promotional support. 4 million copies sold, considered a failure. You never recorded another album. You died waiting to make the next one. In November 2002, you appeared on a hotel balcony in Berlin holding your infant son over the railing. The footage circled the globe within hours. You apologized. The imagery did not fade. In February 2003, Living with Michael Jackson aired. Martin Bashir had followed you for 8 months. In the documentary, you held hands with 12-year-old Gavin Arvizo and said, on camera, that sharing your bedroom with children was the most loving thing in the world. 14 million watched in the UK, more in the US. The reaction was not subtle. 10 criminal charges, child sexual abuse, administering an intoxicating agent, false imprisonment. The trial ran 5 months, every major news organization, every day. The prosecution presented the bedroom arrangements, the gifts, the access, a behavioral profile. The defense presented inconsistencies in the Arvizo family's testimony and evidence they had continued visiting Neverland voluntarily after the alleged abuse had begun. You attended one morning in pajama pants. Your attorney was publicly furious. You said your back hurt. On June 13, 2005, the jury returned. Not guilty. On all 10 counts, every charge, acquitted. You walked out a free man, 46 years old, 2 years investigated, 5 months on trial, not guilty of everything. The people who believed you were guilty before the verdict believed it after. Nobody moved. You left the United States, Bahrain, then Ireland, more than a year outside America. You said the trial had broken something in you. You never went back to Neverland, not once. The ride stopped. The animals were relocated. The place you built to recover a stolen childhood was abandoned and left to decompose in the California hills. At the peak of your earning years, you spent faster than the money came in. Neverland cost millions per year to maintain: staff, grounds, the zoo, the rides, including the years you weren't living there. In 1985, you purchased the ATV music catalog for $47.5 million, publishing rights to approximately 250 Beatles songs. Paul McCartney, who had been your friend, believed you had used knowledge from personal conversations to outmaneuver him. The friendship ended. The catalog was worth billions. It did not generate cash at the speed your spending required. In 2001, you stood outside Sony's offices in New York and called President Tommy Mottola a devil and a racist. Into a microphone, in front of cameras. This is not how most business disputes are resolved. By 2009, outstanding debt exceeded $500 million, against assets worth more. But assets don't pay monthly bills. You needed revenue. The 50 show This Is It residency at the O2 Arena in London was the financial plan, not the artistic one. The announcement came in March 2009. Tickets sold out in minutes. Whatever the world thought of you as a person, as a performer, you were still the thing it wanted most. The rehearsal footage, released as a documentary after your death, shows you could still dance, still hear music the way a musician hears it, still command a stage. It also shows a thinness, a fragility, a kind of exhaustion that goes deeper than the physical. You had not been sleeping. The insomnia had been building since the Pepsi accident, through the 1993 investigation, through the trial, through everything. By 2009, it was total. Nothing worked. The solution? Propofol, a surgical anesthetic, not a sleep aid. Dr. Conrad Murray administered it intravenously in your bedroom every night. He would wait until you were under. Then he would leave the room. Every night, for months. Surgical anesthesia, as sleep. Before 50 concerts at the O2. The most successful entertainer who ever lived could not close his eyes without a doctor rendering him unconscious. A body performing since age 5, for 45 years, without rest, without privacy, without a single ordinary day. It had forgotten how to stop. We're almost at the end, but the story doesn't stop with the death. What happened after is its own kind of nightmare. On June 25, 2009, Conrad Murray administered propofol in your bedroom. Then he left the room. When he returned, you were not breathing. At 2:26 p.m. Pacific Time, Michael Jackson was declared dead. You were 50 years old. Official cause? Acute propofol and benzodiazepine intoxication. Manner of death? Homicide. Conrad Murray was convicted of involuntary manslaughter in 2011, sentenced to 4 years, released after 2. He gave interviews. The memorial at the Staples Center. 1.6 million people applied for tickets to a venue that seats 17,000. The global broadcast audience? Over 1 billion people. 1 billion. For a man who died in a rented house, in a room, with a doctor who had walked away. Your daughter Paris walked to the microphone, 11 years old. She said you were the best father she could ever have imagined. Then she stopped speaking because she was crying, alone at the microphone, in front of 1 billion people, because you were gone. You had spent your entire life trying to give your children the thing that was taken from you at 4 years old. The evidence from that microphone suggests you succeeded at that part. You did not live to know it.
You died owing more than $500 million. In the 17 years since, the estate has generated more than $3.5 billion. For 13 of the 16 years Forbes has tracked it, you are #1 among deceased earners. In 2024, the estate sold 50% of your master recordings to Sony for $600 million. The same Sony. The deal closed without ceremony. In 2019, Leaving Neverland aired on HBO. Wade Robson and James Safechuck, both of whom had testified in your defense in 2005, both of whom had been granted access to Neverland as children and presented publicly as your protégés, described in detailed testimony acts of abuse they say were committed against them at Neverland. Both said their 2005 testimony was false. The estate calls their accounts fabrications. The documentary's supporters point to the specificity of the testimony and a behavioral profile consistent with deliberate, calculated access to minors and their families. No court has determined the truth. The allegations continue to exist. In April 2026, a biographical film called Micheal was released, directed by Antoine Fuqua, starring your nephew Jafar Jackson. It grossed $788 million globally. The debate about its treatment of the abuse claims continued online. It will continue tomorrow. You are the greatest entertainer who ever lived. You may also have caused irreparable harm to the children who passed through Neverland. Your genius is undeniable. The truth about what happened at Neverland is not publicly known. The world holds both versions of you at once, without resolution. It may never resolve it. There is another story, an artist who also had her childhood reshaped by the industry before she was old enough to understand the cost, who also became a target, who also rewrote herself repeatedly under the weight of an audience that never stopped watching. We covered Taylor Swift. The nightmare has a different name. The shape is the same. It's in the channel. You were 4 years old when your father decided your childhood was worth less than your voice. You were 50 when a doctor left the room. The talent took the childhood. The fame took the freedom. The accusations took the peace. The debt took the security. The medication took the life. Every single thing, every single time, without exception. The moonwalk looks like you're moving forward. You were always going the other way. That was true from the beginning, and it stayed true to the end. You are Michael Jackson, and your life, from the first note to the last breath, was a nightmare.
Life is a nightmare.